We've heard a lot of back and forth in this campaign in the U.S. Senate race, but right now we'd like to take a breather and just simply have a conversation. And joining me is Dan Sullivan for U.S.
Good morning,
Senate.
Rhonda.
So if he's the original Dan, are you the new and improved?
I don't want to say I'm new and improved, but the mayor and I are good friends. And we've had a lot of fun with the name issue a little bit on the campaign trail.
I'm sure you have. A lot of good jokes,
yes,
I'm sure.
a lot of good jokes.
Well, speaking of jokes, I guess I want to ask you about an ad that got a lot of attention, national attention, where you shot at a TV set.
Right.
Was that fun?
It was very fun, right? But I actually think it kind of gives, I think it's a sense that, people feel even right now. There's a lot of frustration, of course. The ads are all over the airwaves. So there was a little tongue-in-cheek aspect to that kind of.
But Jon Stewart making fun of you?
Yeah, Jon Stewart made fun of me. Well, he also made fun of my opponent too, in a much worse way. In that, but that ad actually was serious, right? In that, we did put forward an agreement to Mark Bagich about, hey, we can keep all these outside groups off the airwaves if you sign this Alaska agreement, which had been signed in a previous race, in the Massachusetts race against Scott Brown and Elizabeth Warren, their Senate race. They did almost an identical agreement. They kept this tens of millions of dollars of outside spending off the airwaves. So there was a serious element to that
well,
ad.
maybe people will really want that after this
next
campaign.
year. Well, I think a lot of people are certainly wishing that Senator Bagich would have signed that, because it would have kept it off. And I do think a lot of people, particularly now, myself included, have that feeling of wanting to shoot their TV.
Well, please, don't shoot any TVs
no,
here.
nothing.
Okay?
I'm unarmed right now.
All right. Well, one of the things, I want to turn the clock back to when you sort of first appeared on the radar of Alaskans, and that's when Sarah Palin appointed you as Attorney General. And actually, in an odd way, both you and the governor sort of owe your big start to Sarah Palin. She, left her term early, and so he stepped in.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your time with Sarah Palin.
Well, it was kind of short time, right? So I was Attorney General. I was appointed by Governor Palin in June of '09, and she left office in July. So it was actually just about a month. But, a lot of the issues that are still really important issues, and she and I talked about when I was interviewing for that job, federal overreach, unleashing our economic energy potential, pushing back on the Obama administration's overregulation, were things we talked about. We got going there during that time. It was actually also really interesting, we won a big Supreme Court case during that time, and you might remember that was the Kensington mine case, and that was a huge issue for the state. That went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court to allow that mine to move forward down in Southeast. So it was kind of neat. I asked a bunch of the attorneys that worked on that case. They did a great job, took it all the way to the Supreme Court to come meet with Governor Palin and talk about, their time in front of the Supreme Court. So that was a memorable day I had with her on a really important case for Alaskans.
When you talk to people like Red Boucher, the late Red Boucher, who was lieutenant governor, he'll tell you that Senator John Kennedy told him to come to Alaska because that was a place you could be a big fish in a small pond. Wally Hickel, when he came to the state, opted to join the Republican Party because the Democrats sort of had all the turf taken, and he saw new ground. So it's not unprecedented for people to come from the outside and do big things in Alaska, but your opponents have kind of characterized you as this outside carpetbagger.
Yeah. Well, look, I think that's my opponents. As I'm campaigning, the vast majority of Alaskans don't view it that way. I'm like the majority of Alaskans, which is American by birth, Alaskan by choice, and got up here as soon as I can. But my pathway to Alaska was very simple, wonderful. It's still kind of the most important thing in my life. As a young man, I was going to Georgetown Law School in Washington, D.C., and I had the great fortune of meeting a beautiful young Athabascan woman from Fairbanks, very smart, gracious. My wife Julie, who was working for Senator Stevens at the time.
So
And,
how did that sort of
actually,
ignite?
it was a great story. We went to college. We went to the same college, and we didn't graduate the same year. Didn't know each other, and we had a mutual friend who was in Washington at the time. Set us up at a big dinner. She invited a bunch of people, but sat me next to Julie, and literally she was Cupid. The next day, I asked my future wife out on a date, and literally the rest is history. I was smitten. What
was your date?
So we went to a place called the Cactus Cantina for dinner.
And so that's how you made the transition from Ohio Dan to
Well,
hopefully Alaska
you know, like
Dan.
I said, my wife said, look, you know, when I'm done here, I want to go back to Alaska. And I said, roger that, whatever you want to do. So we started our life, after I got out of the Marine Corps, my first active duty was with the Marines in Camp Pendleton. I was an infantry officer for 4 years down there, and then got off active duty, packed up our Jeep. We had a brand new baby and headed north to Alaska. So that was the beginning. It was great.
Well, a lot has been made about your beginnings, you know, that you come from a wealthy family versus Begich, who had maybe a tougher time because his father died, and so he had to kind of help the family early. But you have sort of been portrayed as this guy with a silver spoon in his mouth, growing up in a rich Ohio family.
Yeah, well, again, you know, that's one thing. What the Begich campaign's good at in this election cycle is putting out ads that are not accurate, ads that kind of conjure up fear.
So
Not his record.
Tell us about
Well,
your
look,
family.
I would love to. I'm very proud of my family, and I'm from a big Irish Catholic family. My grandfather was one of 8 kids. 5 of my uncles and great uncles served in World War II. None of them went to college. Certainly not a wealthy family in any shape. And they got back and, you know, became part of the greatest generation in terms of, you know, I have an uncle who's a priest, I have a cousin who's a police officer. My father and grandfather started a small business. I grew up in a very middle-class family, a small home. When I had 5 brothers and sisters myself.
But you didn't have some privilege that maybe other kids didn't. I mean,
growing up, I was a kid who worked, saw my father start working hard on a small business and grew it, and saw the ethic of hard work. I was a young guy, even at a young age, working in a factory, punching a clock to, help pursue what was going on, both in terms of a family, and so that actually work ethic for me. My family's background has stayed with me. It's something I'm very proud of, and also something, in terms of a family that gives back to the community. There's a strong tradition of service. My dad was in the Navy. I have cousins and uncles, as I mentioned, who all served in the military, and then a family that is really focused on giving back to the community in terms of helping the most disadvantaged. And so that's something it stayed with me, and a focus on public service. A lot of my siblings went in the private sector. I have another brother who started a business right out of college, small business guys. But the idea of service stayed with me, and that had a big impact on me.
Well, so your family's wealth kind of came later in life?
Absolutely.
So, because they've donated a lot to your campaign.
Well, look, as I mentioned at the outset, when they're donating, I read about that in the paper like everybody else. These are not things that I knew about. But the broader point is, we were trying to keep outside money not coming into Alaska from third-party interests. And, the guy who's gotten a lot of outside money is Mark Begich, right? He's had Harry Reid's Senate Majority PAC, which is literally funded probably now well over $10 million, some of the most liberal, anti-resource development, anti-Second Amendment Americans in the country are back in the baggage campaign.
Well, let's just say both of you have had your share of outside money. But one thing I want to ask you about, and this is a personal question, is you do have an amazing resume, from being a Harvard graduate to working in the State Department with Bush. It almost seems, and you have a beautiful wife, beautiful family. It almost seems like you just have absolutely the perfect life. But have you ever had a struggle, some kind of a challenge that really pushed you and maybe defines you in some way?
Well, certainly, you know, I mean, I will certainly agree with you. I'm a very blessed man, and you know, especially with my wife, Julie, we have 3 teenage daughters, and but you know, a lot of when you look at in terms of a background, one of the things that I've been very focused on in my life and my career is hard work. You know, putting my nose to the grindstone, try to get things done, whether it's as Attorney General, whether it's a DNR commissioner. And then you mentioned I did have the honor working for Condoleezza Rice as one of her assistant secretaries of state.
We're going to talk about that later, but I mean, did you ever have a challenge or a difficulty that just demanded you rise to the occasion?
Well, sure. I mean, anyone who's been through Marine Corps Officer Candidate School and serving as a Marine Infantry Officer, a Marine Reconnaissance Officer, those are challenges that getting through those schools and successfully graduating from those are huge challenges. And so... But
can you share a story of something that happened to you and give us a sense of how you worked through it?
Let me give you an example.
I mean, I think a lot of people face challenges in life, even people who have seemingly perfect lives.
Sure. Well,
you know,
no,
maybe, you know,
there's no such thing as a perfect life. That's for sure. That's for sure.
But I mean, how about you? I mean, out there working in the Middle East, did you see something that just totally got to you?
Well, you know, I mean, I've seen challenges throughout my career, right? And you know, I mentioned earlier one of the things that I saw is when you look at some of the big problems that we have in the Middle East, for example. You know, a lot of times, even now, the discussions are focused on military issues. To me, so many of these issues are actually broader than that. They're economic issues. So very early on in my State Department tenure, I decided that, you know, we need to not only have a military approach to a lot of these problems, but we need to go look at some of the economic issues. If people have hope, whether it's in Alaska or other parts of the world, that oftentimes is the best way in which to have societies that are moving forward in terms of peace, in terms of prosperity, in terms of opportunity. So I spent a lot of time in that position as an Assistant Secretary of State, including in the tribal region of Afghanistan and Pakistan, working with tribal elders to look at some of the economic opportunities they have there, so people wouldn't want to go join Al-Qaeda and do other things. So, you know, to me, getting out to those areas, tough areas, right? Not a lot of times American diplomats go into the border region of Afghanistan and Pakistan to really get a sense of what the issues are. And that's what I've actually tried to do in Alaska, too. You know, when I was Attorney General, I was the head of the governor's rural subcabinet, the head of the Rural Justice Commission. And what I thought was really important is get out to the communities. Don't let people come to you in Anchorage or Juneau. Go to their villages, go to their homes, see it firsthand on what the challenges are, what the opportunities are. And that's stayed with me throughout my career, getting out to the real places that matter to really learn and then get ideas with people who are on the ground and try to devise solutions to them.
So different cultures, the tribal leaders in the Middle East, in the mountains and hills,
Yeah.
but versus rural Alaska tribal organizations. But did you see any parallels between the two in some way?
Well, you know, like I've said, it's just the issue of hope and the issue of economic opportunity. One of the things that I saw, you know, as DNR Commissioner and Attorney General, you know, some people said, hey, those are very different jobs. They're not connected. In some ways they are different, but the issues are very connected. And the way I've seen it is when you go to places in Alaska where there are opportunities, where there's a strong sense of the future, where people have good jobs, a lot of times those are the places where you have less instances of some of the big social issues. whether it's domestic violence, whether it's suicide, whether it's alcoholism. So to me, you know, looking at the economic potential, looking at the opportunities for our young people relates to not only jobs, but it relates to broader, healthy communities. And I think that's really important for people to recognize.
Well, just recently, the Alaska Federation of Natives Convention endorsed your opponent, Mark Begich. That must have been a disappointment to you.
Well, you know, Mark Begich has been telling people he has the native vote, quote, locked up. And I think that endorsement, although it was an endorsement, there was a lot of regions of the state that certainly did not vote for Mark Begich. And so we felt that we came out of that convention in many ways strong. And, you know, my first community in Alaska has been the rural communities. My wife's, you know, part of a wonderful Alaska Native family. My mother-in-law, Mary Jane Fade, was the first co-chair of AFN, first woman co-chair of AFN. And so my original community when I started coming to Alaska almost 25 years ago, after meeting Julie, was the rural communities and, you know, the Athabascan culture and heritage and lifestyle that's so important to her. And my daughters, we're raising them with those values that they've gotten from their mother-in-law and even my wife's grandmother, Sally Hudson. Great, great leaders.
So where do you have Native support?
Well, you may have seen I got endorsed by the board of ASRC, and that was very important. So I think that
the Arctic Slope Corporation.
Arctic Slope Regional Corporation. And again, I think that just comes from a background when I was Attorney General and DNR Commissioner. I spent a lot of time on the North Slope working with the leaders in the community on, again, some of the big issues that we had throughout the state. Where I saw, one of the things that I always try to do is bring people together and to look at opportunities, say the state, federal government, different regions. And so I'll give you an example. You know, the North Slope Borough has a lot of big resource development projects. They work to permit those, put them together. So does the state. It
so
plays
you have
a role.
those. And I understand that Senator Lyman Hoffman in Bethel has endorsed you as well.
Yeah, so we have a lot of, that's out in the Bethel region. Senator Hoffman's a great leader in the state. But we've had a lot of strong support for our campaign, and we're going to continue. You know, one of the things that I've been doing on the campaign trail is getting out to the rural communities, doing what I've traditionally done, which is get out to the communities, listen to the concerns, and then look at ways to work together to bring opportunities, to bring solutions to some of our challenges. Now,
one of the things that I do want to get to before we run out of time is the National Guard controversy. And I know you have to understand why people would be interested in knowing about your involvement in this. When did you become aware of the National Guard scandal, the charges of sexual abuse, assault?
So when I was Attorney General, I had no knowledge of this, and had I, you know, I had a very strong record of taking action on, you know, those kind of issues. When I was Attorney General, you mentioned back in 2009, you know, I went to Governor Parnell on a broader issue that I think we all recognize now in the state was with our very high levels of domestic violence and sexual assault in the state. And, you know, we have some of the highest rates of domestic violence in the country. We put together a very broad-based strategy called the Choose Respect strategy. Again, sitting down with all the different stakeholders in this community. What can we do? How can we put this together? How can we work on this? And then we launched that strategy at the end of 2009, which was not just public service announcements and marches, but law enforcement in the rural communities.
I guess what people wonder about is given your background, you know, your work in the Choose Respect campaign, as well as, you know, being in the military, being a reservist, that you would be the perfect person to be brought in and address this issue.
Well, look, later, I mean, just this past year, I wrote an op-ed about my campaign saying exactly that. As a U.S. Senator, one of the things I've been campaigning about is we need to continue to focus on this issue of domestic violence, and as we're seeing more broadly nationally, that we need to do it, you know, within the military and other institutions. We can't tolerate it, and this was probably the #1 issue I focused on as Attorney General. We need to bring these high rates down. Yeah, the government certainly has a role, but we also need to change the culture. You know, I have 3 teenage daughters. I have a wonderful wife, and it's about our kids. We need to have a safe Alaska. We need to have a safe America. You know, one of the disappointments, Rhonda, on this whole issue is, you know, the baggage campaign is now trying to say, oh, you must have known, or, you know, they seem to revel in this issue of taking personal tragedies and using them for the benefit of Mark Begich. He did it in an earlier ad relating to a very horrible crime. They're trying to do it now. And to me, Alaskans are tired of that, right? They don't want politicians who are trying to personally benefit from the tragedies of Alaskans. They want to hear what...
But beyond baggage, I think that there's a real concern about this. I mean...
Oh, there should be a concern.
And I guess the FBI did a 6-week investigation, intensive investigation into this. And so you have to understand why there might be questions about why the Attorney General... the state's top cop, so to speak, top law enforcement official, top justice official wasn't brought into the loop. Do you think he should have been? Well,
look, I mean, a lot of times what happens with regard to crimes is there's an investigation first by investigators, and then they turn that over to prosecutors, right? That would be either federal or state. And, you know, like I said, I was not aware of this at all with regard to when I was Attorney General, and I think the Department of Law was aware of it much later.
Well, I guess people are going to be going through this with a fine-tooth comb, particularly the media, as they ask for documents under the Freedom of Information Act. And of course, one of the things that's come out there is a notation on your calendar, a couple of them. One, a teleconference, a phone call with the governor before he met with the chaplains. So you're saying there was no discussion of the National Guard issue at that point?
No, there was not.
How about when you had a meeting on your calendar with the FBI? The notation just says FBI issues, and you had your top staffers there. That didn't come up then?
No, it didn't. As a matter of fact, that was not with the FBI. Again, these are stories that are being pushed by a campaign that, as I mentioned, has been putting out a lot of falsehoods, right? I mean, I actually checked with my team on, who was at that meeting. It was not with the FBI. It was with the Deputy Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General for Civil and Criminal, and one of my special assistants. I double-checked with them on, hey, any issue like this raised during that? No. So, what we're trying to do is, I've been very, very focused as a candidate talking about how important the issue of bringing down our high rates of domestic violence in Alaska. And as a Attorney General, I was very, very focused on the issues. But again, what's troubling to me is that you have a campaign in the Begich campaign that doesn't put out, hey, what they're trying to do. They put out these innuendos that, we're answering. We've been answering for a while.
I can understand why that would be frustrating, but I guess, hindsight is 20/20, as they say, and, the governor has talked about how he was blindsided by some of these issues, and if we take the governor at face value, he did his due diligence, but, I mean, everybody looks back and says, gosh, maybe we should have seen this, done this. I mean, do you have any feelings about that, regrets that they didn't go to you and
Well, look,
get you involved?
like I said, my career as Attorney General was focused on highlighting the problem of domestic violence, putting together a strategy with all the key stakeholders. Again, in getting things done, if you look at the 2010 legislative session, we had many bills that got through that were focused on making the perpetrators of crimes for domestic violence pay higher penalties, getting victim services increased, dramatically increasing legal services. One of the things I was very proud of as Attorney General was that, one of the things that we learned about one of the best ways to bring down our high rates of domestic violence was to get lawyers for women. And I went to Alaska Legal Services and said, do we need more attorneys to help take cases to protect women? The answer was yes. So what did I do? I took action. We held these what we called our pro bono legal summits throughout the state, to go to different communities and go to the lawyers and say, hey, listen, you might be a corporate attorney, you might be someone who's practicing law in a different area. You can come and provide legal services, free legal services for women who are victims of domestic violence. Help us. And we got dozens of lawyers to sign up to take these cases. These are the kind of actions that I had, and I'm a man of action. I certainly would have focused on this.
Well, just one final question on the National Guard issue, and I'll drop it.
Sure.
But I think people want to know exactly when you became aware of this controversy.
So again, I was
You have a date?
No, I mean, the first time I really remember seeing it was in the, in the paper.
And do you remember about what time that might have been?
When the press started reporting on it here in Alaska.
But I mean, was that Sean Cockerham's initial story a while back? Because I think
Yeah, I believe it was those, exactly.
At about that time. Well, let's move on to another issue. Is I know that Senator Lisa Murkowski has been traveling with you in rural Alaska, and she's pretty much said that you're the guy she wants to win. How important has that been?
Oh, it's great. One of the things that we're saying is, one of the things I'm honored by her endorsement, but we're trying to get all kinds of Republicans and independents and undeclareds and Democrats to endorse my candidacy. You mentioned Lyman Hoffman. We've had a number of Democrats.
Why do you think Lyman endorsed you?
Lyman has worked with me. And again, my style is bringing people together, figuring out when we have challenges, putting together strategies, and then relentlessly implementing those so we get solutions. And I've done that with Lyman Hoffman. I've done that with many Democrats in our state legislature. And I think he recognizes that's a big difference between me and Senator Begich. I'm not going to be someone who, in my first term as a U.S. Senator, has a record of putting forward well over 250 bills in the Senate and having only 2 of them become law. You compare that to Lisa Murkowski's first term, Senator Stevens' first term. It's not a record of accomplishment. So guys like Lyman Hoffman.
But at AFN, there was a long list in the resolution of Begich's accomplishments as far as the Native community goes, as part of their resolution calling for an endorsement. But
Well, if anyone knows the Native community well, it's someone like Lyman Hoffman. And
well, let's talk about Lyman Hoffman's turf. It's kind of the heart of subsistence country. People in Southwest Alaska depend on it. And I just want to get a little bit of clarification on Katie John, because you've said that on that court decision, it was a subsistence rights case. You said that your actions in that have been misinterpreted.
No, not misinterpreted. What I did, so as you know, that case had decades, right, where it was litigated. So in subsistence is, I believe that subsistence is very important. It's certainly the highest use in terms of our resources for hunting and fishing, both under state and federal law. My family has a fish camp on the Yukon River that my daughters have been going to, I've been going to. They've been raised in terms of that culture, very important. The issue that I got involved with when I was Attorney General in the Katie John case at that point was not about the rural subsistence preference that either in state or federal law. It was the issue of the extent of Alaska, the state's control over our rivers, or the federal government's control. And what was the extent of that control? As you can imagine, as Attorney General of the state of Alaska, I advocated for more state control and less control by DC bureaucrats.
So in other words, you were trying to clarify the navigable waters issue.
Absolutely, it had become a navigable waters case. And by the way, that position was what, again, Democrat, Republican.
It was over the control over navigable waters.
But I mean, just to be clear, that's what other, attorneys general, governors of both parties in Alaska had put forward. What's surprising is that Mark Begich seems to want to advocate for federal control over our rivers and resources, which is where not the vast majority of Alaskans are.
But let's go back to the decision itself. The U.S. Supreme Court decided that it doesn't want to reopen it. On a personal level, you had to do your job as an AG to protect the state's rights over navigable waters.
Sure.
But on a personal level, are you glad that it stands where it's at?
Well, as you mentioned that, so that was later appealed. I appealed that navigable waters issue to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, the Federal Court of Appeals. The cert petition to the U.S. Supreme Court happened after I left as Attorney General. What I think is important is that we now have clarity, and that's really important. Before, there was not clarity in the law under the navigable waters legal issues of how much the state versus the federal controlled the jurisdiction of Alaska's waters. We have clarity now, and I think that that's what we needed to move forward on the issue.
So are you feeling good with that final decision?
Yeah, I mean, once you get clarity, I think most Alaskans feel that the subsistence management is broken in the state. And again, this is where Mark Begich put out, he was going to fix this with Obama. The administration announced with big fanfare in 2009 that they were going to be able to bring people together to have a better managed subsistence system. None of that has happened. And that's one of these issues where, again, there's a lot of talk. My career has been about action, and that's, again, why I think we have this broad-based support on, people who I've worked with to get things done.
Well, wrapping things up here, I have two final questions to ask you.
Sure.
And I think I just have to ask this. Is there something about you that people would be surprised to learn? I mean, what out there haven't we heard about that people would just really go, oh, gosh, I didn't know that?
Well, so as you can imagine, I spend a lot of my life right now. My life in Alaska has been dedicated for years to my family, my wife, my 3 daughters, to work and to being a Marine. I've been a Marine up here, a reservist. I've had the honor of training hundreds of young Alaskan men to be Marines, serve their country in times of war, many of whom did. But I'm a dad of 3 teenage daughters, and that brings up all kinds of wonderful things. I would consider, you hear about soccer moms and hockey moms. I would consider myself a ballet dad.
Ballet dad?
A ballet dad. My middle daughter, Isabella, is a beautiful, talented dancer, and she has been since she was 3. And I go to all her performances, and I, just like a lot of proud parents, revel in the fact that I watch my daughter, my oldest daughter, Megan, is on the soccer team at South. My youngest daughter, Laurel, loves to draw, and she's also into sports. So I go to all my kids' events. I try to get to all of them, but
despite a rigorous campaign
I'm
schedule.
a ballet dad, and I'm a proud ballet dad. I certainly didn't know much about ballet before I had girls, and now I can tell you I have a lot of tremendous respect for the young men and women who do ballet and other dance in Alaska.
Well, it certainly is physically demanding.
Oh, it's great.
Last question
Sure.
for you is, you have been leading in the polls, but with elections, you never know how they go, up or down. And, there's a potential that you may not win. So given that event, what would be next for you?
Well, you mentioned we've been leading in the polls, but I tell my team, hey, I want you guys to run. I certainly am running like, we're down 20 points. So we're going to run this election, the campaign, through the tape and do what we've been doing, laying out a positive vision for Alaska, for the country. I think a lot of people think that the country's going in the wrong direction, and we need to change that.
But if you don't have that opportunity to do that, what then for you?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I certainly will look and find I'm sure, a opportunity in Alaska, and whether it's in the private sector or public service, which has been certainly a lot of my career, my adult career. I'll continue that. I'll continue to serve in the Marine Corps. I'm a commanding officer of what's called a Marine Anglico unit right now. That's like a Marine Recon Battalion that I run in the reserves. So I'm sure I'll look at those opportunities.
So you're more than just a candidate.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you.
My pleasure. Thanks very much.
Learning you're a ballet dad.
I'm a ballet dad. You can quote me on that.
All right. Thanks very much,
Good.
Dan Sullivan, candidate for U.S. Senate.
Thank you.